Hi, my name is Alex Williams, founder of the New Stack, and you are listening to the New Stack Analyst podcast. Each week, we look at application development and management at scale. I'd like to thank our sponsor today, the Intel Data Center Group, a leader in defining the open data center, cloud computing, and world of connected systems infrastructure. Its portfolio supports multiple processor families to offer options for workloads that reflect today's diverse user needs. That's the Intel Data Center Group. You can find them at intel.com. Now let's get to the show. Good morning, DockerCon. Here we are. We're going to get started with a pancake breakfast discussion here. And I just wanted to get things going with just a little bit of my thoughts on where we are right now. The whole idea here for these pancake breakfasts is to help us set a tone, help us get a feeling for what we're going to be talking about, and so we can really start to have a conversation about where the Docker and container ecosystem is going. And first of all, I want to introduce our panelists, but before I do that, I'd really like to thank Intel, which is sponsoring this pancake breakfast, and they're actually sponsoring the pancake breakfast series, and the whole goal is just to continue to talk about the direction of the Docker and container ecosystem. Well, let me introduce our speakers here, and maybe Jérôme, you could start and just explain who you are.
Hi, so I'm Jérôme, and I work for Docker when I do mostly evangelism, and so you probably saw me or heard me talk about Docker and containers somewhere.
Hi, I'm Fintan Ryan. I work for RedMonk. We're an analyst firm, somewhat different to the traditional analyst firms. We take a look at everything from the viewpoint of developers.
I'm Chenxi Wang, Chief Strategy Officer for Twistlock, a container security startup. We are in the new innovator space inside, so come visit us. I'll be talking about container security on the panel.
Merker from Google. We pioneered running containers at scale about a decade ago, and I work on the container engine, container registry, and Kubernetes.
Well, great. Thank you guys all for being here and at DockerCon. And Chenxi, I was talking with you a little bit beforehand. I was talking with you guys as well about this conversation we had last night. We had this Champagne podcast that the Software Circus group did. And this conversation came up about an experiment that the Container Solutions group did about a year ago. And they essentially created ways for the containers to mutate, in essence. They created a VM and they put containers in the VM, and the containers were able to talk to a central node and be able to determine what they needed on the front end and what they needed on the back end. And so once they did that, then they could determine, okay, well, I need a database, right? So what happened, though, out of all this was just this incredible amount of information. And the complexity just became enormous very, very fast. And this kind of made me think a little bit differently about container security, because one of the questions I've had is how do we make this transition in our minds from traditional security with virtualized applications to this new form of security where containers could potentially spawn, and you could have this mutating, this environment of containers, and that seems to be kind of a need for, a better services layer on top, right? Where you understand, you don't need to know everything about what's on the underlying infrastructure, but you need to have an idea what the services layer, you have a better, capability to have a services layer that gives you the information that you need.
What did I tell you about mixing champagne and podcast?
Yeah. Well, you said basically that tell me what you told me when we started.
So, I remember. I'll start. Obviously, everybody else has a lot to say. So, in my opinion, the traditional security and the security for a container ecosystem is vastly different in the sense that traditionally, I've been in security for a long time. Think about lots of security mechanisms are either ops only, firewalls, IPS, web application firewalls. They have very little knowledge of how the applications are built, and what the application inner works are. So they kind of just throwing darts in the dark, to be honest, ops-only technology. And then you got static analysis technology who are just in the compile time, or in the development time, rather. And they have no idea what the runtime dependencies are and what the runtime environments are. So they make decisions based on their narrow points of view. And both of these in itself is useful, is valuable, but it's missing an opportunity where the two sides can integrate, can talk, and so that in runtime you could take some of the development time intelligence, make more informed decisions. You're not really looking for a needle in a haystack, you're looking for a needle in a reduced haystack, or some of the needles just won't be there. And I think containers actually allow us to do that now, that we can, in runtime, in development time, we can say, here are the dependencies of runtime you should expect, and then in runtime, you can take that information and make decisions about security. And we just have to engineer those layers of being able to process those intelligence and being able to execute the management, if you will, in runtime. And if we get that piece done, will be much, much better off in terms of security than it was with traditional applications.
So Jérôme, in your studies of the ecosystem, and you're seeing its development now, and we're starting to see containers being used in production, obviously a lot more than at this time last year. And now we're starting to see kind of this capability to just make these very dense container environments, right? You know, what are the dangers that we face with this, and from your perspective, what are the things that we need to be thinking about, you know, as we see more containers go into production? What is it the responsibility of, you know, of the user out there to make sure that they have a safe environment?
Well, we've seen security evolve significantly between 1 year ago, when people were mostly concerned about isolation, and more recently when the focus shift to the provenance of those containers, and just as Chenxi explained, doing some analysis on what's in the containers, figuring out if they are secure that way, and to kind of address the thing you evoked before, like this application that can mutate. Something, if you follow the microservices idea, just not exactly the specifics, but the general idea of putting each different little thing in a different cell or container, instead of having this giant monolithic application that also changes itself and spins up more resources, we can have this application with front ends and back ends, and then we can have another service that is still part of the application but runs separately and will take care of adding resources and changing resources. And so this complexity that you were evoking can then be more contained or at least isolated somewhere. And so today I think people are trying to find out what security for container exactly means. There is a lot of people worrying about, oh, containers are less secure than VMs or something like that. That's the wrong mindset. The right mindset is to remember that security is always a matter of layers and security in depth, and that containers are one extra layer. So instead of being afraid of, okay, I have less security because I have less containers, or is something new I don't know, it's always one extra layer. So any infrastructure with containers will always be more secure than the same infrastructure without containers, all things being equal otherwise. Yeah.
So Kit, what is this rethinking then of the architecture that you're starting to see that's really reflected in today's container ecosystem, what you guys are seeing in particular with Kubernetes?
In terms of security or in general?
In terms of security, because I guess in terms of security specifically, yeah. But I think it reflects on kind of the general ecosystem right now.
Well, what we're seeing, when we look at Google Cloud Platform, Kubernetes, and sort of the Docker users that we're working with, security is definitely a priority for everyone, and they are rethinking it. And I think it's useful to think of it as another security layer. I think one thing we see a lot of is sort of the diligence aspect, and users that want the more secure operations, they're taking a lot more responsibility for sort of the security operations, and so seeing more tools come in that automate the diligence efforts, whether that's patching or security analysis and whatnot. That's one of the things we're definitely seeing as a need in the marketplace for more tools to kind of automate the laborious analysis and kind of make it more proactive. That's one thing we're seeing. I think from an architecture perspective, I agree. It's sort of having more less monolithic application architectures. It makes it moves the sort of the attack surface around. Right? So we're definitely not advocating for people to stop using VMs, for example. We still see VMs as a valuable layer for people to have in their sort of security arsenal.
Why is that?
Why is that?
Yeah.
Just for tenant level isolation, to have basically, actually, to be honest with you, it's really about not having to rewrite the entire playbook. So if you've already have kind of an acceptance of VMs as a security layer, continuing to use VMs in the same way, there's no harm in doing that. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So Fintan, this question came up with the current state of container-based applications, that we're seeing emerge, and they can do their own health checks, for example, right? Is everything before that legacy then? I mean, the virtualized applications before containers, is everything legacy?
No, everything is not legacy. I think we're seeing emerge in a lot of places is this kind of, I'm loath to use the phrase kind of two-speed type development, but we have a legacy of things that are there that are just not going to go away. So the idea that we're just going to turf it all out and move on to something else doesn't work, and it doesn't scale in any large organization. It's not going to happen. What we are seeing, which is different, is people looking at this as a development approach and going, okay, there's a whole bunch of new things I can do, and a whole bunch of new approaches. So one of the things I say quite frequently, you come to events like this, and everyone here is right at the forefront of what's happening. When you go and talk to kind of very large organizations, they ain't all here. Like they're coming here, they're looking at this, like the adoption level is astounding, but they're not there yet. So the idea that we can tell them you can throw out everything and you can do this really simple translation, it doesn't work. It doesn't compute for these folks.
That's just unrealistic. But
yeah.
But what are some of the things that you're seeing, Jérôme, that companies are doing, and what is that rate of change?
Well, companies are mostly adopting containers for greenfield applications. I mean, that's what we do from the Docker perspective, which doesn't mean that it's less suited for legacy applications, but just that it's easier for greenfield applications. When you have all this legacy, the VM mindset and everything, moving that into containers is probably going to slow you down. For a new application, however, you can get all the benefits and the faster the development and deployment cycle. And then I guess that in the coming months, years, we will see more people building those bridges between traditional legacy environments and containerized environments, so that we can say, okay, now that we figured out what are the patterns, what are the best practices and everything for containers, how can we get our legacy stuff into that in the in the easiest way?
Chenxi?
Yeah, so I agree that a lot of companies using containers are using them for greenfield, new applications. They're not yet rewriting the bulk of legacy applications. But what is interesting to me is at Twistlock, we work with customers. What we see is when they're looking at containers, the speed of adoption is much faster than other technologies that they've adopted in the past.
How do you see that?
Yeah,
how can you quantify that?
Right. Customers that we've talked to have, if they were experimenting with containers, within 2-3 weeks, they're able to take to operation their new applications. And it's those rate of throughput of new applications coming to production is much, much faster. And at the same time, I think just a few days ago, Datadog released a new survey. They said that within 2-3 weeks, people are operationalizing container-based applications.
So they can get these things started a lot faster.
A lot faster. And even if it's the very first application, they're little, trepid about it, they're still doing it much, much faster than traditional technologies.
So can't that be dangerous too? I mean, if you can have this rapid acceleration?
It could, because then you're giving developers much more power than they were used to, or ops are sort of felt left out of the loop, and that's why the ecosystem technologies are coming up, including us and others, are trying to give ops the visibility and control they're accustomed to without slowing down this rate of adoption.
Now let's take a quick break. before we get back to the second half of the show. I'd like to thank the Intel Data Center Group, a leader in defining the open data center, cloud computing, and world of connected systems infrastructure. Its portfolio supports multiple processor families to offer options for workloads that reflect today's diverse user needs. That's Intel Data Center Group. You can find them at intel.com. Now let's get back to the show. So Kit, you're seeing, Kubernetes has grown quite a bit. How much has it grown? Can you say, just from the open source repositories out there, how much it has grown?
It's a little early in the morning to quote statistics for me, honestly.
I thought you just
you're
knew
much
that.
more alert than I am. It's growing very rapidly. I mean, we're seeing, by any metric you look at, whether it's GitHub stars, contributors, the number of downloads, number of deployments. I mean, the number is growing and continuing to grow, and people running it production, we're seeing that massive uptake there.
So with this rapid acceleration, and we're hearing, why are we hearing so much now about microservices? And is this something that's real? How do you guys perceive microservices and in the discussion around it? How do you describe it to people?
I think microservices are fake. I don't think it exists. I think it's all made up.
Is it? Okay. Why is it made up?
I'm kidding. No, absolutely, microservices is real. I mean, are you kidding me? Look at this.
I was hoping that you actually believe that, so we could actually get into discussion.
Yeah, I'm sorry. We need a controversial.
Actually, then let me play devil's advocate. How could you argue that microservices are not a reality at all?
They absolutely are. I mean, the trick with technology, whether it's especially when we do this reductionist, soundbite kind of view of technology, where it's the cloud and it's all these different things that are terms that had a specific meaning at some point and then they become meaningless over time. People have different conceptions of when we say microservices, what we're really talking about. But it's we all knew since the beginning of our software careers that building things that are more modular, that are more decoupled, that are can be maintained separately. These are a better design for the long run and deal with resiliency and failure. I wanted to kind of add on to your question earlier about isn't it dangerous? And I think one of the things that's kind of amazing about what's happening is, and Chenxi kind of said this, is that companies are emerging and technologies are emerging to help alleviate some of that danger, especially in startup mode for developers. So things like Twistlock, for example. But another really cool piece of technology is Bitnami's new Stacksmith service, which I think is going to help with rapid prototyping and rapid development, and lets you outsource some of the mundane tasks of keeping your container-based environment up to date. There are these tools that are going to make developers just more effective over time as they're worrying less and less about the routine, mundane tasks. And that's really where we want to get to, is that developers can focus on the thing that adds value for their organization and not reinventing the same sort of operational diligence over and over again.
So Fintan, you're going and talking to these customers who've just gotten used to virtualization, right? Or they may be more advanced than that. Maybe they're like, hopefully they are. I do hear stories, but do they ask about microservices, and what are they asking about?
Depends quite a lot on the types of organizations, but I would say probably somewhere in the region of 70% of the kind of corporate people we talk to are asking about microservices at this point. What you generally find in these companies is you've got this kind of advanced technology group that's sitting inside there, which tends to actually be kind of a mobile focus group, someone like that. And these are the guys that they get CI, they get DevOps, they get all the other pieces that you need to make this happen. And they're bringing up the conversation, kind of going, look, we can turn this application around so much faster, and this is why. And other people in the organization are starting to look at it. That's part of what's driving the adoption at such a high rate is just that agility. People kind of go, oh, hold on, yeah, we really need to be able to do that as well.
Right. So Jérôme, when you're out there and you're talking to people and you're having these conversations with them, they're talking about microservices. How do you put that in context for them for the rest of the stack, right? Because Docker is very symbolic in many ways about changes throughout the stack in itself. What are these conversations you're having with people on that topic about how the overall stack is changing, and what are these things that they're trying to figure out what they're so they can really adopt these new technologies? I mean, is it a continuous delivery question that they're starting to face? Is it
Well, it's containers help in multiple ways with that. Obviously, there is the whole microservices idea where containers are great because they're a good way to deploy many little things. So that's a pretty good fit. The continuous integration and delivery story is also a pretty compelling one with containers. But just like for the whole legacy to greenfield story, I believe that we're going to see soon stories about how we got a partly monolith, partly microservices application, something like that, which often is what happens. We have this big monolith and we did not break it down to microservices overnight. We started with this small part that had some significant scalability issues and would be better in another language, another framework, and that we needed to scale out. So we chip like a bit away from the monolith, and that's like the beginning of the path to microservices or something like that. And I think microservices are not the end goal here. It's more, it's a tool that we can use just like containers, VMs. It's always about the tools, and if you don't need microservices, you don't need to break down this application into 100 services. Sometimes just 5 or 10 is what you need, and sometimes keeping something that looks like a monolith is just fine. But there again, it's easier to think as let's do microservices, easier for greenfield applications because it's always easier to build from scratch than refactoring, obviously. But I think there we'll also see something in the middle of the spectrum, something where we break down some parts in containers, in microservices, and maybe we still have this legacy thing using what we already had before, just because it makes sense and it continues to work.
So we only have a few minutes left, and so perhaps we should conclude this by helping us understand what are some of the themes that you're thinking about as we get into DockerCon.
For me, the things I'm thinking about as we look forward, a lot's changed in the last year. I was thinking back to Amsterdam a year ago, and like how much things have progressed in the last year, how many more people are running containers in production, how much more adoption we see even in cloud technologies and everything. So I think looking forward, it's really about the ecosystem and the tools, making, kind of putting the finishing touches on all these things that we like, all these are great ideas a year ago, and seeing that stuff all come to fruition. Looking forward, like really productionizing the container workload and microservices as a tool, but also hybrid cloud as a tool, thinking about these different things. Those are kind of the top of mind: security, application deployment, and ease of use.
Chenxi, what are some of the questions that you're thinking about?
I'm really looking forward to having the conversation about the integration of security and orchestration. I think there's a lot of innovation could happen at the orchestration layer that will make security much easier and much more exciting place to be. We're really looking forward to doing more work with Kubernetes, for instance, and that's one of the layers that I'm hoping to see folks are doing here and have the conversation and take away with ideas from DockerCon to execute at home.
So Fintan, one question I have, and maybe you can give me an idea of what you're thinking about as we go to DockerCon, is like this, this split between dev and test and ITOps, so to speak, and like how you see those two camps progressing as we move forward into the next year, and what are some of the themes you're thinking about in context of DockerCon? I know it's a very simple question, but
no, the dev test question is always a horrible one to get. How do I see it progressing? I go back to and kind of reiterate what's already been said about how the orchestration layers are going to be used and how people will manage things with that. And I think that you're going to hopefully see people kind of looking at things in a much more identical way to what we've had, particularly with traditional legacy applications and the whole setup and rip down of environments and all that kind of stuff, which is quite awkward. On the ITOps side, it's all about observation and observability. I can never get that word out. It's all about that. It's if I'm running something like Kubernetes, how do I look at everything at scale inside it? Do I use, what kind of tools do I look at? Do I look at things like Sysdig? Do I look at things like Rescope? Those kind of stuff. There's all of that kind of area is really what we see happening on the ops side, and then the security aspect as well is going to be quite key. I think that the major part that I see that I quite like watching at the moment is everyone is still focused on automating things as much as possible,
Right.
getting as much stuff there, which is basically about making developers' lives easier, which is ultimately why we're all here. That part is something that I think is just going to keep continuing.
All right. Jérôme, any thoughts on DockerCon and kind of that converging point of DevTest and ITOps?
Well, for me, the convergence point is more like about the industry and the community. I'm really excited to see that Docker, which was really born from its community at first, is now gathering this community and the industry together in an event like this. And for me, at a personal level, that's the really exciting thing.
Great. Well, thank you all for participating in this pancake breakfast here at DockerCon. Thank you all for coming by. I want to thank Intel for sponsoring the pancake breakfast, and have a great conference. Thank you. That's it for this week's show. Thank you very much for joining us. I'd like to thank the Intel Data Center Group. They're a leader in defining the open data center, cloud computing, and world of connected systems infrastructure. Its portfolio supports multiple processor families to offer options for workloads that reflect today's diverse user needs. You can find them at intel.com. That's the Intel Data Center Group. Audio editing and sound design for the new Stack Analysts podcast is provided by Broken Hours. You can find them at brokenhours.com. Thanks again, and hope to see you back at the show. Bye-bye.